The morning sun did little to warm the cold, formal air of the municipal courtroom. The room was packed, a sea of tired faces waiting for their turn before the judge. The air smelled of old paper and cheap cleaning supplies. At the back of the line, near the heavy wooden doors, sat a young woman. Her name was Maya, and she was there for a parking ticket. Not to anyone else, it might have seemed silly. The fine was $80. But to Maya, a librarian who spent her days organizing information and following rules, the ticket was wrong. She had parked legally in a spot that was poorly marked. Paying it felt like admitting a mistake she didn't make. So she took a morning off work, dressed in her best simple dress, and came to court to explain. Up front, behind a tall bench that made him look like a king on a throne, sat Judge Harold Wainwright. He was a man in his late 50s, with a voice that had grown bored and impatient over thousands of small cases. He moved through the docket like a machine, his gavel tapping like a metronome. Guilty, fine paid. Next. Guilty, 30 days to pay. Next. Maya watched, her hands growing clammy. She practiced her few sentences in her head. Your Honor, the sign was obscured by a tree branch. I have a time-stamped photo. She clutched her phone, the evidence saved on its screen. Finally, the clerk called her name. Maya Carson, case number 44,721. She walked forward, her shoes making a soft tap on the linoleum floor. She stood at the little podium, looking up at the judge. He barely glanced at her, shuffling through another file. Ms. Carson, he said, his voice flat. You are contesting a citation for parking in a restricted zone. City's evidence? A police officer at a side table nodded. The officer's sworn statement, Your Honor. The sign was clearly visible. The judge looked at Maya. Do you have anything new to add that isn't in your written plea? Maya took a small breath. Yes, Your Honor. I have a photograph from that day, taken from my car. It shows the no parking sign is completely hidden by an overgrown tree branch from the city park. You can't see the regulation at all. She held up her phone. The judge peered down, sighed, and waved a hand. I don't look at personal devices. The city maintains its signage. The officer's statement stands. Violation upheld. Fine is $80, plus court costs of $45. You can pay at the clerk's window. It was over in less than a minute. The dismissal, the refusal to even look at her proof, hit her like a physical blow. A hot wave of frustration washed over her. All the waiting, the preparation, the principle of it gone with a wave of his hand. The words slipped out, quiet, more to herself than to him, a bitter whisper. This is a disgrace. The judge's head snapped up, his bored eyes suddenly sharp and cold. What did you say? The room went very still. Maya's heart pounded. I'm sorry, Your Honor. I just meant, did you, or did you not, just call these proceedings a disgrace? His voice was loud now, cutting through the quiet room. I was frustrated. I apologize, Maya said, her voice trembling. Apology not accepted, Judge Wainwright said coldly. He straightened his robes. You are in direct contempt of this court. $100 for the contempt, payable immediately, or 48 hours in custody to consider your respect for the law. He banged his gavel. Bailiffs, 2 uniformed court officers, a man and a woman who had been standing like statues by the wall, immediately stepped forward. They moved to either side of Maya. Please, come with us, the male bailiff said, his tone firm but not unkind. He took her gently by the elbow. The reality of a jail? For a muttered comment? Crashed over her. A panic, pure and instinctive, shot through her veins. As the bailiff guided her, she pulled her arm back. It wasn't a fight. It was a startled reaction. The body's need for space when trapped. The bailiff's grip tightened. "Ma'am, don't resist." The female bailiff moved in, grabbing Maya's other arm. Their holds were firm now, professional but forceful. Maya, off balance and terrified, stumbled. Her shoulder wrenched. "Let go." "I'm not," she said, her voice rising in fear. What happened next was a blur of motion and pressure. The male bailiff, perhaps interpreting her stumble as aggression, shifted his weight. He used a standard compliance hold, twisting her arm behind her back. Maya cried out, a sharp sound of pain and shock. Her legs buckled. Instead of easing up, the bailiff drove downward, forcing her to the hard, cold floor right in front of the judge's high bench. As she went down, the side of her head struck the corner of the wooden step with a sickening thud. A collective gasp sucked the air from the courtroom. People stood up. Someone shouted, "Hey!" Maya lay on the floor, dazed, a sharp pain blooming in her temple. The world swam, the polished shoes of the bailiffs and the shocked faces of other citizens swirling above her. The cold linoleum pressed against her cheek. For a moment, there was only the pounding in her head and the hum of shocked silence. Then, chaos erupted. The court clerk, a woman with glasses, rushed from her desk. "Oh my God! Call a medic." She knelt, not touching Maya, but her eyes were wide with horror. Papers from Maya's file, which had been on the clerk's desk, were scattered across the floor near them. The judge was on his feet, his face pale. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, though it was happening right before him. The gavel was forgotten in his hand. The female bailiff looked at her partner, her own expression one of sudden uncertainty. The male bailiff, who had taken Maya down, stood stiffly, his hands now at his sides, looking from the judge to the woman on the floor. The bright, fluorescent lights of the courtroom beat down, exposing every detail of the awful, still moment. The fight was over, but a new and heavier tension had just begun, lying there with Maya on the cold, hard floor. The gasp that filled the courtroom was sharp, like the air had been ripped from everyone's lungs at once. For a second, there was absolute silence, broken only by Maya's shallow, pained breaths on the floor. Then, a wave of noise erupted, muffled shouts. The scrape of chairs as people stood. A child asking their parent what happened in a loud, clear whisper. The court clerk, a woman named Linda who had worked in this room for 20 years, was the first to move. Her practical shoes clicked against the floor as she rushed from behind her desk. Kneeling a few feet from Maya, she didn't touch her, knowing better than to move someone who'd hit their head, but her face was etched with deep concern. "Someone call for medical." She called out, her voice cutting through the buzz. Her eyes scanned Maya, then darted to the scattered papers around them. Maya's file folder had flown from the edge of the clerk's desk during the commotion. Now, its contents a copy of her parking ticket plea, her driver's license information, and a few other forms were fanned out across the worn linoleum. Among them was a standard white business envelope, sealed, with the official logo of the State Judicial Board in the top corner. Linda automatically began gathering the papers, her hands moving with the brisk efficiency of her job. As she reached for the envelope, she paused. It was thicker than usual, and it was addressed formally to the Honorable Maya Carson, C.O. Municipal Court Clerk, District 7. She blinked, reading it again. Asterisk the Honorable? That was a title for a judge. A mix-up, surely. A wrong label from the state office. But the name was correct. Maya Carson. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She looked from the envelope to the young woman on the floor, who was now trying to push herself up onto one elbow, wincing. The male bailiff had taken a step back, his face a mask of stiff professionalism, but a faint sheen of sweat was visible on his forehead. The female bailiff was helping Maya sit up slowly. "Just take it easy for a second," the female bailiff said. her voice much softer than before. Judge Wainwright was still standing behind his bench, one hand gripping the edge of the dark wood. His initial shock was hardening into irritation at the disruption. "Get medical in here and clear this disruption," he said to no one in particular. His eyes fell on Linda, who was still holding the envelope. "Clerk, what is that?" "Get the docket back in order." Linda stood up, the papers clutched to her chest. She walked quickly to the judge's bench, stepping around Maya and the bailiffs. She kept her voice low, meant only for him and the court reporter sitting nearby. "Your Honor, there's—" This was in her file. She placed the envelope in front of him and pointed to the address line. "It's from the Judicial Board. It says the Honorable." The judge's brow furrowed. He snatched the envelope, tore it open with a thumb, and pulled out a letter. As his eyes scanned the formal lines of text, the simmering irritation on his face drained away, replaced by a slow dawning pallor. He read it again, his lips moving slightly over the words. The courtroom was still buzzing, but a pocket of quiet existed right around the bench. The court reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Carol, watched the judge's face change. She had seen every kind of reaction in this room, but this was new. It was the look of a man who had just stepped into a hole he didn't see. "Check it," he finally muttered to Linda, his voice tight. "The online portal. The new appointments roster. Now." Linda hurried back to her computer, her fingers flying over the keyboard. The state's Judicial Administration website was bookmarked. She logged in, navigated to the appointments section, and pulled up the list of judges pro tempore, temporary judges appointed to help with overloaded dockets. She scanned the list for the current date, and there it was. Carson, Maya. Commission start date, today, 8 a.m. Status, active. Jurisdiction, District 7 Municipal Courts, Inkle, Branch 12, this very courtroom. The digital record was clear, official, and bore the state's digital seal. Linda felt a chill that had nothing to do with the courtroom's air conditioning. She looked at Carol, the court reporter, whose own eyes were wide behind her glasses. Linda gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Carol, without being asked, turned her stenography machine back on. The soft tapping was the only sound in their little circle of silence. Judge Wainwright slowly lowered the paper. He looked at Maya, who was now sitting fully upright on the floor, a red mark clear on her temple, her dress rumpled. She was looking at her own hands, trembling slightly in her lap. He then looked at the two bailiffs, who were waiting for instructions. The entire power structure of the room, which had seemed so solid and unshakable 2 minutes ago, was now tilting on its axis. A man in the front row of the spectator benches stood up. He was young, wearing a slightly rumpled suit. He was a public defender, waiting for his own case. He had watched everything with growing anger. "Your Honor," the public defender said, his voice calm but firm, carrying across the now quieting room. "Given the physical altercation involving a court officer and a member of the public, I must ask for the record to be secured." And he added, glancing at the judge's ashen face and the letter in his hand, "I would respectfully draw the court's attention to Judicial Conduct Code. Section 14B. It pertains to the succession of judicial authority in cases of incapacity or conflict. The code was obscure, a rule for emergencies. It stated that if the presiding judge was unable to serve due to a conflict of interest, a medical issue, or being a material witness to an incident in their own courtroom, the gavel would pass to the next available sworn judicial officer present in the chamber, judge. Wainwright was now a key witness to an assault that had occurred 3 feet from his seat. He was deeply, personally involved. He could not preside over anything related to this moment. All eyes in the courtroom, the confused citizens, the worried clerk, the stunned bailiffs. The watchful public defender drifted from the judge to the young woman on the floor. The woman who had just been sworn in, without anyone knowing, as a judge of this very court. The weight of the situation settled over the room, heavy and still. The pain in Maya's head was throbbing in time with her heartbeat, but a new and unbelievable reality was beginning to pierce through the fog of shock and humiliation. She wasn't just Maya Carson, library clerk, anymore. The law, in its strange and error-prone way, had just given her a title, and with it, a terrifying kind of power. The silence in the courtroom was no longer just shock. It had transformed into something else, a thick, waiting quiet, like the air before a thunderstorm breaks. Everyone was looking, but no one knew what to do next. Maya sat on the cold floor, the side of her head throbbing. She could hear the words the public defender had said, but they felt like they were coming from far away. Judicial Conduct Code. Succession of authority. They were phrases from her law books, from the grueling exams she had just finished. They didn't belong here, in this messy, painful moment. Judge Wainwright was still standing behind his bench, the letter from the judicial board dangling from his fingers. The confidence that had filled his voice when he'd held the gavel was gone. He looked like a man who had been suddenly untethered, floating in a room he no longer controlled. This is a procedural error, he finally said, his voice trying to find its old force, but cracking slightly. He looked at the court clerk. Linda, there must be a confirmation process. A phone call, something. Linda, from her computer, shook her head slowly. Her face was pale. The commission is active in the system as of 8 a.m. Your Honor. The oath of office was administered electronically last Friday by the State Board. It's valid. The public defender, a young man with a tired but keen face, took a small step forward. He spoke carefully, respectfully, but his words were like stones dropped into the still room. Your Honor, with all due respect, the code is clear. Given the incident that just occurred, you are now a material witness. To preserve the integrity of any inquiry and the rights of all parties, you must recuse yourself from any further proceedings related to this matter. He paused, letting the word recuse hang in the air. It meant to step aside, to give up the bench. The judge's eyes darted to the two bailiffs. The female bailiff was still kneeling next to Maya, her hand lightly on her shoulder. The male bailiff stood rigid, his hands now clasped tightly behind his back, staring straight ahead at the wall, avoiding everyone's gaze. Wainwright knew the young lawyer was right. He had seen the bailiff take Maya down. He had ordered the contempt charge. He was at the very center of it. If he tried to gavel the room back to order now, anything he did would be challenged, torn apart. The law he had wielded for so long was now turning, gently but firmly, against him. All the eyes in the room followed his gaze as it finally landed on Maya. She was struggling to process it. The throbbing in her head made it hard to think. She remembered the online ceremony last week. It had felt like a formality, a weird digital hoop to jump through after passing the bar. The state had a backlog, they'd said. They were commissioning a bunch of new judges pro tempore to help with the workload. Her start date was later in the month. Or so she'd thought. The clerical error was now devastatingly clear. Her start date was today, this morning. Before her parking ticket hearing, she wasn't just Maya Carson, the woman on the floor. According to the cold, digital records of the state, she was Judge Maya Carson. The public defender turned slightly, addressing the room, but his words were for her. The code designates that in the event the presiding judge is unable to serve, the next available sworn judicial officer in the chamber shall assume the bench to ensure the court's business may continue and to secure the scene. He didn't say it outright. He didn't point at her. He didn't have to. The weight of 100 stares pressed down on Maya She felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the blow to her head. This was impossible. This was a nightmare. She wanted to stand up, walk out of this cold room, and go home. She wanted to forget about the parking ticket, the angry judge, the hard hands of the bailiff. But the young lawyer's words echoed. To secure the scene. The scene of what? The scene of her own assault? The room was tense, confused. The two bailiffs were still there. The judge was frozen. The people in the seats were whispering, some pulling out phones. If someone didn't take control right now, the situation could spiral into something even worse. A memory flashed in her mind, cutting through the pain and panic. It was from her professional ethics class. Her professor, a kind old judge herself, had said, "The law is not an abstract thing. It is what happens in the room. Your duty is not to yourself in that moment. It is to the law itself, to keep it from becoming chaos." Maya took a deep, shaky breath. The female bailiff felt the movement and helped her stand. Her legs felt weak, but they held. She looked at her hands, still trembling. Then she looked at the high, polished wooden bench, the judge's empty chair, the gavel lying on its side. That chair was a symbol of everything that had just gone wrong, the dismissive power, the rushed judgment, the terrible force that had followed. But it was also the only tool in the room that could maybe, just maybe, start to make it right. She didn't feel powerful. She felt scared, hurt, and deeply uncertain. But a slow, solid clarity was forming beneath the fear. If she walked away now, what would happen? The judge would maybe try to sweep it under the rug. The bailiff would face no immediate consequence. And she would have let the authority of the law, an authority she had just sworn to uphold, crumble into nothing. She looked at the public defender. He gave her a small, grave nod, not of pressure, but of recognition. He saw her conflict dot her voice, when she finally spoke, was hoarse at first. She cleared her throat. The sound was terribly loud in the quiet. "The court clerk has verified the commission," Maya said. It wasn't a question. She was stating a fact, her eyes on Linda, who nodded once, firmly. Maya turned to Judge Wainwright. She forced herself to meet his gaze. There was no anger in her voice, only a flat, exhausted resolve. "Judge Wainwright, you are a witness to the use of force against a judicial officer in your courtroom. For the integrity of any subsequent proceeding, you must recuse yourself." She was quoting the code back to him. She was using the law, and in doing so, she was accepting its burden. She took one step, then another, toward the bench. Her shoes clicked softly. Each step felt like a mile. The crowd watched, utterly hypnotized. She walked around the side, past the stunned judge who simply moved aside, and stood behind the massive wooden structure. For a second, she just looked at the chair. Then she turned and slowly, carefully, lowered herself into it. The leather seat sighed under her weight. The height of the bench changed everything. She was no longer looking up at the room. She was looking at it. She saw the faces, curious, worried, some hopeful. She saw the two bailiffs, watching her warily. She saw the public defender, standing attentively. The gavel was within reach. She did not pick it up. Not yet. She looked at the male bailiff, the one whose hands had been on her. "Officer," she said, and her voice was clearer now, carrying in the silent room. "You will step back and stand over there, by the witness door. You will not interact with anyone until this is sorted." It was not a request. It was a calm, direct order from the person sitting in the judge's chair. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes flicking to the former judge. Wainwright said nothing, just stared at the floor. The bailiff then nodded, stiffly. "Yes, Your Honor." The title, now correctly applied, hung in the air as he walked to the side of the room. The shift was complete. The woman who had been struck down was now in. The room held its breath. From the high bench, Maya could see everything. The dust motes dancing in the slats of light from the high windows. The nervous tap of a foot in the third row. The way the court reporter's fingers rested, poised, over her machine. The world looked different from up here. It felt less like a position of honor and more like being stranded on a small island, with everyone waiting to see if you could swim. Her head still pulsed with a dull ache, a constant reminder of how she'd gotten here. The weight of the decision pressed down on her, heavier than any law book. She could feel the expectant stares, the unasked questions. Some people looked hopeful. Others looked skeptical, as if waiting for her to make a mistake, to prove she didn't belong in this tall leather chair. She saw the public defender, still standing respectfully near his table. His calm presence was an anchor in the swirling room. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. He nodded back. First things first. The law needed order above all else. She turned her gaze to the court clerk. Linda. Miss Clerk, Maya said, her voice finding a steadier rhythm. Please note for the record the time, and the change in presiding judicial officer, due to recusal and succession under the code. Her words were formal, but necessary. She was building a wall of procedure around this madness, brick by brick. Yes, Your Honor, Linda said, her fingers flying across her keyboard. The familiar tap, tap, tap was a sound of normality returning. Maya then looked at the bailiff who had remained with her. The woman. Officer, she said. Is medical on the way? They've been called, Your Honor. ETA 5 minutes. Thank you. Please ensure they are directed here when they arrive. She then looked at the other bailiff, the one standing stiffly by the door. And you, officer, you will remain there. Do not speak to anyone. Is that clear? Yes, Your Honor, he said, his voice tight. A murmur rippled through the spectators. She was handling it. She was actually doing it. Now came the harder part. The law was about more than just quieting a room. It was about addressing wrongs. And a wrong had just happened to her in front of everyone. But she couldn't be the victim and the judge. The system wouldn't allow it, and more importantly, it wouldn't be right. She looked at the public defender. Sir, she began, unsure of his name. Miller. Your Honor, I'm with the public defender's office. Mr. Miller, given the extraordinary circumstances, and to ensure absolute transparency, I am appointing you as a special officer of this court for this matter only. Your role will be to act as an independent fact-finder concerning the incident that occurred between... She paused, the words sticking in her throat for a second. Between myself and court security. You will interview witnesses, secure any available footage, and report directly to the court. Do you accept this appointment? Miller's eyes widened slightly. This was unusual, creative, and smart. It took the investigation out of her hands and placed it in the hands of someone whose job was to look for the truth, on behalf of the accused. It was a move of pure fairness. I do, Your Honor, he said, standing a little straighter. Good. You may begin by noting the witnesses present. The court clerk will provide you with a sign-in sheet. She then turned her attention to the heart of the problem. The two bailiffs were employees of the court, but in this moment they were potential subjects of an investigation. They couldn't just go back to work as if nothing had happened. She addressed the room, her voice growing stronger. The two court officers involved in the prior incident are hereby placed on immediate administrative leave, pending the outcome of the inquiry by Mr. Miller and any subsequent review by their direct superiors. A louder wave of whispers washed over the crowd. This was action. Real consequence. The female bailiff nodded, her face serious but accepting. The male bailiff by the door clenched his jaw, but said nothing. Furthermore, Maya continued, I am ordering the chief of court security for this district to appear before this court. She glanced at the clock. Within 2 hours, to receive the report of this incident and to outline the immediate steps his department will take. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't using the gavel for force. She was using the language of the system appointments, orders, administrative leave to dismantle the chaos, piece by piece. She was showing that the power of this chair wasn't about being the loudest person in the room. It was about being the most precise, the most fair. Finally, she looked down at the papers still scattered near the foot of the bench. Among them was the original contempt order from Judge Wainwright. She picked it up. The paper felt flimsy, insignificant compared to everything that had followed. She took a deep breath. Regarding the matter of the contempt charge levied against me earlier, she said. The room went pin-drop quiet again. This was personal. This was the spark that started the fire. Would she wipe it away for herself? A judge cannot preside over a matter concerning themselves. It is a fundamental conflict, she said, echoing the very principle that had brought her to the bench. Therefore, I am vacating the contempt charge and the associated penalty. They are null and void. She didn't sound triumphant. She sounded tired and final. It wasn't a victory. It was the correction of an error. The first of many that needed correcting today. Just then, the heavy side door opened, and 2 paramedics entered with a small kit. All eyes turned to them. Maya looked at the medics, then at Mr. Miller, then at the crowded room of people who still had traffic tickets and small claims to deal with. The world kept turning. Her head throbbed. This court, she said, with a new firmness, will take a brief recess so that I can speak with medical personnel. The docket is paused. All parties are to remain in or near the courtroom. Mr. Miller, please begin your work. She didn't slam the gavel. She simply stood up, her movements slow and careful. As she stepped down from the bench, the spell was broken. People began to talk in low, urgent voices. The paramedics approached her, but as she walked toward them, past the still silent Judge Wainwright, she wasn't just the woman who got hurt anymore. She was the judge who had, in a few calm minutes, taken a broken, violent moment and begun to shape it into something the law could actually handle. The path to justice, for herself and for everyone watching, had finally begun, and she was the one holding the map. The paramedics led Maya to a small, windowless room just behind the courtroom that was used for lawyers to meet with clients. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. One of them, a woman with kind eyes, shone a small penlight into Maya's pupils, asking her simple questions. What day is it? Do you know where you are? Can you follow my finger? Maya answered, her voice flat. She was present, but her mind was somewhere else, replaying the feel of the gavel's handle under her fingers, the weight of all those eyes. The medic cleaned the small cut on her temple and placed a butterfly bandage over it. You've got a mild concussion, the woman said gently. You should really get a proper scan at the hospital. You need rest. Maya just nodded. Rest felt like a fantasy from another life. I just need a minute, she said. As the paramedics packed their kit, there was a soft knock on the door. The court clerk, Linda, peeked in. Your Honor? I'm sorry to disturb. The chief of court security is here, and there's the matter of the docket. She looked apologetic, almost embarrassed to bring up the mundane work of the court after everything. Maya took a deep breath, the air tasting stale. The law didn't stop for pain. I'll be out in a moment. A few minutes later, she walked back into the courtroom. The buzz of conversation died instantly. She saw that Judge Wainwright had left the main floor and was now sitting in the front row of the spectator benches, his head bowed as if in thought. It was a powerful image, the judge become the watched, the chief of security, a broad-shouldered man with a grave expression and a neatly trimmed mustache, stood stiffly near the bench. Mr. Miller, the public defender, was at the clerk's desk, speaking quietly with a few people from the audience, who were likely giving their statements. Maya did not go back to the judge's bench immediately. Instead, she walked to the public defender. "Mr. Miller, a brief update?" He turned, his notebook in hand. "I've taken statements from 7 witnesses so far, Your Honor. The consensus is clear. I've also confirmed with the clerk that the overhead security camera was active and recording. The footage has been isolated." "Thank you," Maya said. She then turned and faced the security chief. "Sir, you have received the basic facts of the incident that occurred in this courtroom?" "I have, Your Honor," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "And I've spoken briefly with my 2 officers. I want to express my department's deepest regret for what transpired. The use of force appears to have been an escalation beyond what was warranted." Maya listened, her face calm. Regret was a feeling. She needed action. "Your officers are on administrative leave, as I'd ordered. Pending the full review by Mr. Miller and your own internal investigation, what are your immediate steps to ensure this does not happen again in this building today?" The chief was taken aback for a second. He was used to apologies, to procedural delays. She was asking for a solution right now. I will personally oversee security in this courtroom for the remainder of the day," he said. "I will also mandate a briefing for all court officers at the end of shift, reiterating de-escalation protocols." "See that you do," Maya said. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. The real consequences would come later, from the facts, from the video, from the official reports she would ensure were filed. "You will receive Mr. Miller's preliminary findings by end of day. This court expects your full cooperation." "Yes, Your Honor." She then looked over the room. The people waiting for their parking tickets and small disputes looked back, impatient, confused, but also strangely patient. They had seen something real today, something more important than a fine. Maya walked back up to the bench. She did not sit. She stood behind it, her hands resting on the cool wood. She addressed the room. What happened here today began with a small thing. A dispute over a parking ticket. She glanced at the spot on the floor where she had fallen. It became something much larger. A failure of procedure. A failure of restraint. A failure of respect. She wasn't shouting. Her tone was matter-of-fact, but every word carried in the silent room. This court has taken the first steps to address those failures. An independent review is underway. Those directly involved have been stood down. The chain of command has been notified. She paused, letting it sink in. But the business of this court, the small, everyday matters of people's lives, must also continue. It must continue with the understanding that the law is not a hammer. It is a scale. It must be balanced carefully for everyone. She looked at the court clerk. "Ms. Clerk, please call the next case on the docket, the one that was scheduled after mine." Linda, looking stunned, fumbled with her papers. That would be case number 44,722. A Mr. David Chun, contesting a traffic signal violation." An older man in a neat sweater stood up hesitantly. Maya finally sat down. She gestured for him to approach the podium. As he did, she saw his hands were shaking. He was terrified. He had just seen what could happen in this room. "Mr. Chun," Maya said, her voice softening just a degree, "please take your time. Explain your situation to the court." The man began to speak, his voice wavering at first. He showed a photograph on his phone of a sun-obscured traffic light. Maya listened. She asked a clarifying question. She looked at the officer's report. She did not rush Dot, and then she made her first real ruling from the bench. The photographic evidence raises reasonable doubt about the visibility of the signal, she said. Violation dismissed. The man's shoulders slumped in relief. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you so much. You're welcome. Next case, please. And so she continued. For the next hour, Maya Carson, the librarian, the law graduate, the woman with the bandage on her temple, presided. She listened to people. She looked at their evidence. She ruled fairly, some for, some against. With each case, the strange tension in the room began to melt, replaced by a simple, weary respect. She was not a hero. She was just doing the job that had, by a bizarre twist of fate, fallen to her. When the last case was heard, she announced the court was adjourned. She stood, her body aching with fatigue, and walked down from the bench. Judge Wainwright was waiting near the door. He met her eyes, his expression unreadable. He gave a short, stiff nod of friendship, but of professional acknowledgment. Then he turned and left. Mr. Miller approached, handing her a file. My preliminary notes, Your Honor. The full report will be on the clerk's desk tomorrow. Thank you for your service today, she said outside the courtroom. In the echoing marble hallway, the sunlight from the high windows was now long and golden. The ache in her head was a steady drumbeat. A long journey of investigations, hearings, and likely lawsuits was just beginning. But something had been settled today. She had walked into the courtroom as a citizen, feeling small against an uncaring system. She walked out as a judge, having seen firsthand how fragile that system really was, and how it depended not on the height of the bench, but on the character of the person sitting in it. The gavel was just a tool. True authority, she now knew, was what you built with it in the moments after the sound faded away.